Hi, I'm Rhoberta Shaler, the relationship help doctor. And sometimes things just go completely strangely, don't they? Like sometimes you can have the greatest goodwill. You're really reaching out and endeavoring to do something, and the other person just simply doesn't see it. And sometimes you don't have good boundaries, and sometimes you have things that you think are boundaries because they're done in such fear, they become rigidity. So I just wanted to share something with you today because it just happened to me. I was at a luncheon a little while back and a woman introduced herself and she said some things that I thought were quite opposite to what I thought made sense. So I said, "Oh, I'm interested in that. Those two things don't seem to go together very well. Let's talk about that." And then she explained and told me she was an expert and that she had every right and every reason to do it. And I thought, "Oh, well, that's interesting. I'll think about that some more." So we decided that we would connect. And one of the reasons we decided we would connect is because I offered it. I like what Abraham Lincoln said once. He said, "I don't like that man much. I better get to know him." And when someone has a real edge to them and seems to be coming from fear, I often have that feeling like maybe they need to talk. Maybe there's a side to them I don't know. Now, sometimes I just believe my intuition, but in this case, I decided that I wanted to understand why these two particular parts of this woman's business went together. So I suggested that we have a talk on Zoom. And we made a time, which was for 10 a.m. this morning. And I went into the room to do that. And at 9:58, just as I'm going to the 10 o'clock call, my computer did that horrible thing that computers sometimes do. It decided to reboot all by itself without any permission from me. So I had no way to get on the call and no way to communicate. So as soon as my computer came up, I sent this woman an email and told her what had happened and said, I will still keep the rest of the half hour open and I will be in the Zoom room. I thought that was a reasonable offer as we had set aside a half hour to talk. Now, I want to just make a distinction about boundaries. You know, sometimes when we're really afraid to set a boundary, we come across in a very aggressive way. And sometimes we think we're entitled to talk to people in ways that demonstrate no skill at all. So this was one of those times. So I did what I could do. You know, at 10:08, I sent an email and I said, I'm sorry, my computer went down. I'm ready and I'll be here until 10:40. I heard nothing. At 10:30, I received an email, and I would just love to share with you what that email said. It said this: "Okay, I understand. I didn't receive any form of communication from you about your computer, so I took another call from a client." Makes sense. Then she added, "In future, if people are late and I don't receive communication before, I take another call within 5 minutes. I practice a high standard of integrity. Let's just reschedule." Well, you know what? I really didn't feel like rescheduling because that's not a boundary. It wasn't communicated prior. So a boundary is something that you say, and you say, here is my boundary, and you give a person the time to honor it. Suggesting that she has a high level of integrity also suggests that maybe the rest of the world does not. There's rigidity in that. There was no prior communication. So when you want to set a boundary, it's really important to say it and give someone the opportunity to respect and honor it. But if it goes uncommunicated and then you're annoyed that your boundary, which no one knew you had and was beyond that person's control to do anything about, is violated, it is unreasonable to believe that you have the opportunity to demonstrate your anger. So I want to just talk about boundaries because when you're afraid to set boundaries, when you're concerned that somebody won't honor them, sometimes we just get a little ferocious. And there's no need to be ferocious. What there is need for is to be clear and to communicate it in ways that simply talk about yourself. This is how I work, which this woman said, I maintain a high standard of integrity. So now I know that she believes that that's the way she wants to work. And that's great. I believe that. I think it's very important to be respectful of one another too. However, I found that this communication was entirely uncalled for. And I see Lorna saying, I had a similar experience with a so-called friend recently, and now I'm ready to go no contact. Knowledge highlights so much, as does therapy. Yes, thank you, Lorna. Absolutely true. So, I knew this woman. My experience of her in the luncheon that I attended was that she had an edge to her. And when people have a real edge to them, I don't feel they're comfortable in their own skin, and I don't think they feel confident in what they're offering. So there was that. But then to get this communication simply reinforces my earlier thought. So that's why I responded to her by saying, I don't think there's any need to have a further conversation. I honor my own boundaries. I'm not going to walk into a door that's going to be shut in my face. I am not going to allow myself to be spoken to in ways that are unnecessarily unkind. And yes, there's a case to be made that all she was doing was stating what her preferences are, and that's great. I have no judgment about what she did, but my part in it is to say, that's not for me. That's not going to work. I will now set a boundary, which is, if we see each other at a luncheon again, great. Otherwise, I don't see any great need to reschedule. So when we're setting our boundaries, let's just think about what they're not. They're not defensive. They're not aggressive. They're not communicated after the fact and then with expectations that you should have known. These things are not boundaries. These are control. These are ways that people like to control other people. And I think it's very important for us all to realize that we don't control other people. We all know hijackals do enough of that. We can state our boundaries as this woman does. I now know a little more about her. And yes, I may have another conversation with her at another time, and it may be different, and I'm open to that possibility. However, I'm not going to place myself in that situation. My mother, who was a raving hijackal, she used to come home from a meeting or something, and she would say, well, I really took the wind out of her sails. And, I always knew my mom was just not behaving in ways that made sense to me. So I happened to be 15 at the time she said that, and I remember looking at her and say, I think you'd be much happier if you just took your sail out of her wind. And in that case, and this case today, I am simply taking my sail out of this woman's wind. How are you doing with your boundaries? I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, the Relationship Help Doctor, and I offer free consultations so that we can get to know each other and see what kind of difference we could make in your life. You can go to forrelationshiphelp.com and click on the Work with Dr. Shaler button. I look forward to speaking with you soon.